The idea of leaving childhood behind and moving into adulthood is something that is just taken for granted.
Joining us is Paul Marcinkowski, an expert in youth development with the Becoming a Man program.
He has spent 20 years helping young adults navigate the journey to manhood.
If I put myself in their shoes and the program's called Becoming a Man, I might be a little hesitant. Like, what does that mean? Like, what's happening in that room?
I emphasize that it's called becoming and not be a man because it's a lifelong process. The awareness piece is what I want them to have. An awareness of, oh, I probably already have the skill set I need to get through whatever the challenge is. I just maybe am not tapping into those positive attributes. And then there's an aha moment at that. Oh yeah, I didn't realize like this is all about my breath is more powerful than how much I could bench press. If I could stop and breathe, then I'll probably make a slightly better choice than if I don't take that second to stop and breathe. God, this teacher is such a bee. God, my mom keeps asking me to do this and she won't get off my case. While on the other hand, there's gun violence and funerals, gang violence, and the pressure to join. There are quite literally life and death moments that we deal with while navigating the day-to-day adventures of just being a teenager.
For our listeners, you could let them know what a rites of passage is and what a healthy version of that might be for a young teenage boy.
Sure. So the idea of leaving childhood behind and moving into adulthood is something that is just taken for granted. And now you're an adult. I oftentimes hear people say, I wish I had done this sooner.
Hello, welcome back to the Men's Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Marc, and I'm here with Paul Marcinkowski. He works for an organization called BAM, Becoming a Man, where he works with young adults and initiates rites of passage for these youngsters. So I'm really excited to have you on there because we've kind of been focusing on Gen Z men. I think it's like an emerging population that's starting to get into therapy, starting to get into men's work, and I'm really excited to hear your insight for both Gen Z men and maybe even Gen Alpha, you know, the kids that are in elementary and middle school now. So Paul, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, so I always like to start with the personal story. Like, what got you into doing men's work? How did you start down this path?
Men's work was something I had not even heard of until I got the job I currently have. And Becoming a Man, like you mentioned, the program, Becoming a Man is one of many programs run by Youth Guidance, which is a nonprofit based out of Chicago. And about 20 years ago, the program was started up by one guy who was employed by Youth Guidance, and he had done the Mankind Project, amongst other men's weekends. And so as he built this thing up where he wanted counselors to be hired on and spend time in the school asking young men to sit in circle, look at parts of themselves that they might hide, repress, or deny, their shadow, face accountability and integrity. He said that if the program were to expand and people were to get hired on to do it, the employees would have to go do their own work first. And so my personal story is that I just have always done youth work. Since I was a teenager in high school, I've been working at summer camps, after school programs, different things like that, travel youth programs. And I was working for a different nonprofit doing social emotional learning through play, through before after school soccer programs in the Chicago public school system. When a friend of mine put me onto BAM, I applied. And when I did, they said, you'll get the job. Are you willing to go do this, training? I said, sure. And I fell in love with it. A lot of my coworkers do it, check it off, and kind of move on. Now we have an in-house training that we do instead. But for me personally, I found it to be something that was missing in my life. It opened me up eventually into individual counseling. That eventually opened me up to trying 12-step programs. So there's been a long 10-year journey of growth that begins with, for me, my initiation, my Rite being the New Warrior training adventure with the Mankind Project 10 years ago in like 2 months. So that's kind of how I got into men's work, but youth work is something I've been doing for 20 years now.
Dude, I love that story. I love how they like require that you do, Mankind Project or some kind of training, some kind of personal work. as I'm building on my business, I'm trying to figure out how I can mandate that or how I can pay for that. Because I think that's so critical. It's so critical to have providers that have done the work themselves. And you seem to be a great example of that.
Yeah, we have in the past worked with the Crucible and Inward Journey and various organizations to give people an option of where they want to go. And I think it's one of the things that makes the program I work for unique, different, maybe more powerful than some of the other programs I've seen, or maybe not more powerful, but certainly more unique, is that we have this kind of secret sauce that's like men's work language. It's not often that I could find myself in a business meeting with my supervisor or colleague, and we're talking to each other about integrity, accountability, what personal shadows are coming up in my life that are impacting how I'm showing up at work. It's a blessing for sure. And I think it makes for better BAM counselors working with the youth.
I like that it's part of the workplace culture, because so many guys in this work, they're lonely, like maybe they do a warrior weekend or they do something and they kind of lose contact with some of the guys, or they have their friends, but none of their friends speak the language. So they just feel kind of like the weirdo, in their group. But I think, the workplace is the best place to do it because you're seeing those people, every day. And it sounds like you can really weave in these concepts into your day to day.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm curious, go back to the program, talking about BAM a little bit. You said having youth, sit in on these circles. Can you paint a picture for our listeners? How old are they? Does it happen in schools? What are some things that they talk about? Like, what's the kind of a typical day in BAM look like?
The program operates in schools from 7th grade to 12th grade. I work at a high school, so I'm only working with 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. We also have middle schools or hybrid schools that have junior high and high school together. And a typical session is one class period, about 50 minutes. It happens during the day. We're very conscious about not doing it before or after school so that it has higher rates of participation and buy-in from the students. Realistically, some students between jobs and sports and responsibilities of having to go home, take care of their younger siblings, wouldn't be able to participate if it was happening outside of school hours. In my school, we rotate the schedule every week, move it by a period so that the students aren't getting pulled from the same class 2 weeks in a row. And the biggest incentive is it's a chance for them to get out of class or come have some pizza or, whatever, some snacks in the BAM room. So they come in because it seems like a fun place to be, and it is. And they don't realize that it's like a healing space or a safe space or a therapeutic space or somewhere a brave space. And until, they're 6, 7 months into it, or some of them 2, 3 years into it, and realize, oh, okay, like I initially came here just because I didn't want to be in this class, or I came here just because I heard you guys have pizza parties. But now, like, I come here when I'm having a bad day or when there's a problem at home or I need help with something. So I'll have anywhere from 12 to 15 students, roughly the same age group. Sometimes it's the same friend group, or a lot of the guys in the circle maybe are in the same sports team, and they'll come in and we'll do a check-in, and then we'll go. My classroom doesn't really have desks. It's got just chairs in a circle on a carpet. I've had students say it feels like what they see in movies and AA meetings, and I go, well, it's kind of, it's mirrored, because there is this space that you're not coming in to take a test, you're not coming in with a textbook, you're coming in and I've got games and comfy furniture and different stuff for it to just be a fun space where they could let their guard down and really be kids. And in that space, what happens is eventually they build up enough trust to really open up and share vulnerably. And after we did the check-in, we have a curriculum we follow. Youth Guidance has its Becoming a Man curriculum for any of the cities that partner with BAM, because we operate in public schools everywhere from LA to Boston to Kansas City. And our sister program, Working on Womanhood, is about 10 years old now, and does a very similar thing for students who identify as female. So the students who I work with, we will do a check-in, we will do some sort of an activity. I might put on a song or part of a movie or a TV clip. We'll tie that to some of the values in the program. The 6 core values are accountability, integrity, visionary goal setting, positive anger expression, respect for womanhood, and something I'm blanking on right now, self-determination. And so it will be linked to one of those 6 values in terms of maybe a movie they've seen or a TV clip. We'll do a discussion, and we will have challenges, some sort of like group missions where the students have to work together to solve a puzzle or put a ball in this basket without having it touch something else, or whatever it is, to work on like nonverbal communication or teamwork or thinking outside the box. And then we check out. And so that's the typical group session. The program runs throughout the year from the fall until the spring. We're in the school full time. And yeah, I'm very fortunate to have a very nice class space in a part of the school that gets a lot of foot traffic. So a lot of students are coming in and out of the room, even when it's not their BAM period. And we work closely with teachers, admin, the behavioral health counseling team. It's an opt-in program. It's not a mandated program. So students agree to be in the program. If they don't want to be in the program, they're not. And usually I have more interest than I have capacity to work with. So that's a good thing. It's a fun program. And we always have a long wait list because guys want to get in and want to be a part of it. Some will find out about it through word of mouth. Their friends or their teammates will tell them about it. Because we're in middle schools, I've had freshmen who have come into my high school having already done the program for 2 or 3 years with a different counselor in a neighborhood elementary school. And there are also referrals. The teachers, staff members, counselors will sometimes, have someone on their radar because of something they're dealing with or something they brought to the teacher. And then through the referral process, that'll end up at the BAM counselor's desk to say, all right, let me check in with this guy and see where I can put him in. And we have a caseload of about 55 to 60 young men per school year.
That sounds great. I mean, I wish I had that in my school growing up. I mean, that sounds like, yeah, it's both fun and connective at the same time, and I like that you like lure them in there with pizza or, TV or games or whatever. I mean, that's what kids are interested in. That kind of spins off my next question is like, how are they talking about gender? I can think of, if I put myself in their shoes and the program's called Becoming a Man, I might be a little hesitant. Like, what does that mean? Like, what's happening in that room? What does it mean to be a man? Like, it seems confusing or kind of complex.
Yeah. And I'll say it's certainly evolving from what the conversation was 20 years ago when I was coming out of high school. So I emphasize that I'm not there to define something for them or give them instructions, that it's their path to walk and I'm simply there as a guide. So our first day, the first lesson, when guys are brand new to the program and have never sat in circle and probably have never questioned what does mean to become a man, I open up the floor and ask them, what does becoming a man look like? When have you become a man? What makes a man? What's the difference between a boy and a man? And we get everything from really mature answers with depth about responsibility and keeping your word, right up through, humor, juvenile jokes about sex and, this and that. And I say, like, all your answers are correct. As many people as we have in the room today, we're going to have that many different kind of definitions or opinions about what it is. I emphasize that it's called becoming and not be a man because it's a lifelong process. I tell them me at 25, different than me at 38, presumably different than I'll be at 65. And so my goalposts are always moving and what I want for myself is changing. And so I tell them this is, a lifelong thing. It's not like you're going to not be a man if you don't sign up for the program. It's not like you're going to get an instruction manual and figure it all out if you do sign up for the program. But it's just a chance for us to really explore, like what I've heard to refer to as the man box, a call to men, which is another organization that was at the big tent with us. I've brought my students to some of their events. We've gone to a movie screening where they were working with a football team somewhere out in, I think, maybe the mid-Atlantic area. And what the guys were doing looked a lot to me like our BAM circles. And so I wanted to show my guys that programs that have different logos or different names or maybe a different demographic of race or economics or geography, that there's other guys of their age sitting around doing the same thing, which is talking about breaking out of the box. We have a whole lesson where I draw a box on the board and I have guys put what they think is inside and what they think is outside of it. The inside being what's common, what's in their world, what's the known, and outside is anything that's unknown, their future, different aspirations, different possibilities that they haven't yet attained. And when we talk about what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman or to be in relationship with women in our lives, we have an activity in which I draw something on the board and I have the guys put everything in that represents language they use to label women. And we just kind of sit back and I say, all right, look at all this, because I asked them to think about their relationships with their mothers, with their girlfriends, with their teachers. And then of course, like everything, they've just kind of been socialized to, say or objectify or view women as. And we do the same thing about men. I say, throw all the words out for women and throw all the words out for men. And then we kind of compare what's on the board and what are the ones that we consider positive adjectives, negative adjectives, which ones are hypersexualized, which ones focus on emotion, which ones focus on physical traits, and what does that say about our lens? And that's tied directly into our conditioning and breaking out of that man box, breaking out of what I think it means to be a man. I was raised that men don't cry. I was raised that men don't talk about their feelings, that's feminine or that's weak, and challenging those things. Oh, well, I know that, my father didn't talk about his feelings, but, he drank or he turned to whatever work or something in unhealthy amounts. And I actually rather open up, or I feel positive that I could, teach my little brother to talk about his feelings by modeling for that. That's the kind of stuff I hear and see. And so I see this generation as being, I think, far more aware of mental health and more open to it, and an awareness that like not talking about feelings isn't masculine or feminine, a gay thing or a straight thing. It's like, it's either healthy to express how you're feeling or unhealthy to not express how you're feeling. And I think most of my guys would agree on a intellectual level that it's a good thing, but it's very different to put it into practice and to give them space where they actually can. So today I just had one of my students, we had our first session of the year today, and he says, man, last week something happened. I was having a real bad day and I really could have used this space. And so I said, why? Because, we couldn't fix the issue, right? If your screen cracked, I can't repair your phone. If you hit, your car on the light pole or something, I can't fix your fender. So like, what is about this space that you could have used last week? And he says like, well, it's just an opportunity for me to talk with other people about how I'm feeling. So the problem is still there, but I can either get another perspective or at least unload and open up and just take a break and let it out, put the weight down. And that was for me the biggest difference going from all the different roles I had had before, coach or teacher or whatever my roles were with youth. It was oftentimes from a mindset of how can I fix whatever the issue that you're bringing to me is. And by doing my work, and really focusing about how other people can be mirrors for me, if someone's triggering me, then perhaps what I see in them is something that just doesn't sit right with me internally, and it's just making me aware of that. And I was able to take a step back and say, okay, I'm not here to fix everything that is going on for 60 different young men. That's impossible. And it's not fair to them, because then the moment they're out of the program or I'm out of the school, they no longer, they don't have the tools as developed. So what I'm trying to do is hold that mirror up, sometimes quite literally. There's a big 6-foot mirror in the classroom, and I'll have the guy stand in front of it. He says, man, those girls need to, last week, a student said, these girls need to stop worrying about me and talking about me and doing this and that, and they need to focus on themselves and focus on graduating. I said, oh, yeah, that's real good. Come here for a sec. And we stood right in front of the mirror. I said, can you say that again? And he looks at the mirror and says, yeah, you're right. Okay, I got to focus on graduating. I said, yeah. So, like, you're right that they're upsetting you right now, but go to class and do what you got to do. So for me, doing the work was really coming in and realizing that it's a space, not so much that I'm answering their questions or finding resolution. It's that the awareness piece is what I want them to have, an awareness of, oh, I probably already have the skill set I need to get through whatever the challenge is. I just maybe am not tapping into those positive attributes, or the negative self-talk, which is another part of our curriculum. We focus a lot on negative self-talk and the different thoughts that we, the messages we convey to ourselves, and just giving them the awareness that, oh, whatever the strength or resiliency that I need, I just have to tap into it, or making them comfortable, helping them get comfortable with asking for help. Because if the issue is high school related and you're in high school, that's great. But if you're now a junior in college and it's, college related, or you're 24 and it's related to your marriage or your career or your whatever, then the one steady thing besides whatever you have internally, your own kind of positive attributes to, fall back on, the other piece is that someone else is there. It's not me. But if I've gotten them comfortable asking for help, then whoever else is in that context, they can turn to them because they themselves feel comfortable asking for help. That's quite literally our first lesson. Like our first lesson will talk about what it means to be a man, but the very first thing they do in the room before we have any conversation, before we go into depth about what does it mean to be a man? What do you know in your life that's a role model, whatever, before we do anything that's like in a headspace, I just have them hold a closed fist in front of their partner and try to get it open. And it turns into, ruckus, and they're throwing each other around. They're trying to bite each other's hands and this and that. And the lesson is, at the end of the day, like, who was successful? What did you do? And some say, yeah, I almost broke his fingers. I pried him apart. But the lesson is like, well, I asked my partner for help. Or how many of you thought to ask your partner for help? And there'll be assumptions. He wouldn't have said yes if I did. And, so that's I think that activity is a good embodiment of like what we do. It's thinking outside the box. It's non-traditional. It helps students get into their bodies instead of their heads. And it's fun and engaging. It's, maybe breaking the rules. It's like something you're not supposed to do in school is, move around or be noisy or be physically aggressive. Of course, safety and respect are within the bounds of the classroom, but in that safe context, having them do something that is not traditional. And then there's an aha moment at that. That's my favorite piece is, a lot of our activities, a lot of our lessons, a lot of our group missions, there'll be some sort of aha moment of, oh yeah, I didn't realize like this is all about asking for help, or this is all about my breath is more powerful than, how much I could bench press. If I could stop and breathe, then I'll probably make a slightly better choice than if I don't take that second to stop and breathe.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an incredible program. I'm curious, like, what issues are the guys coming in with? You know, what do these Gen Z men struggle with? What do they find stresses them out, or questions that they have, you know, whether about being a man or just their emotional world in general?
I would say, by and large, the day-to-day things I work with are rather universal teenage things. It sounds like, I mean, there are things that are different. Social media introduces a whole different dynamic that did not exist in the 80s. Socioeconomically, I will say that the school I work at, even though just a few miles from the high school I graduated from, there is a world of difference in terms of gun violence, access to housing, access to, reliable food, clothing, resources. Those realities are there and different from what my experience was growing up in my predominantly white middle class suburban school. And despite the 20-year gap and the difference of, the community, most of my stuff is the exact same stuff my friends and I were dealing with when we were 16. God, this teacher is such a B. God, my mom keeps asking me to do this and she won't get off my case. Or my girlfriend, broke up with me. How do I tell this girl I like her? How do I tell why did my friend, I thought we were friends and now they're talking about me behind my back. It's a lot of it is universal stuff that's social. It's peer-to-peer relationships. It's finding my own identity, right? The guys I work with are in that age range where they're no longer little kids. They're not quite yet adults that are careered. And so it's this scary idea that has a lot of potential and a lot of unknown. And one of my boys just today was saying, like, what did you do after high school? And I told him. And then he said, after you graduated college. I said, well, this is what I did. And he said, oh, I have no idea what I'm going to do when I graduate. I said, yeah. And 5 years before my college graduation, 5 months before my high school graduation, I had no idea what was around the corner either. And he said, yeah, that could be scary. I said, yeah, it could. And some people could, be paralyzed by that. And some people could lean into that. We react differently. But those are kind of the issues we're dealing with. And at the same time, like, the reason the program is so important, I think, in some of the schools we work in, some of the communities we work in, is we are simultaneously dealing with prom or grades or mom said this or I cussed that person out, while on the other hand, there's gun violence and funerals, gang violence and the pressure to join, or having made some choices, gotten tied up with people because they're in your family or on your block or in your community, and now dealing with the repercussions, trying to get out of it. So there are quite literally life and death moments that we deal with while navigating the day-to-day adventures of just being a teenager. When we take students out for a week-long road trip for our spring break college tour, we might go to the mid-Atlantic, from Chicago out to DC, or from Chicago down to New Orleans or Dallas. When we go to these different places, it's a chance for them to be on college campuses, to do some fun activities, to play tourist, to do all these really cool things that a week on the road in hotels in different environments offers. And at least among peers, when I talk to my colleagues, not so much the students, but when we talk to to each other as colleagues, we realize, like, the biggest value sometimes that it offers is just leaving the space of the block for a week when there is no school, unstructured day, summertime, springtime. It could be hot. And unfortunately, there have been multiple times when we've been on the road or at a summer camp far up north in northern Wisconsin. And when we come back 7 days later, there are repercussions of gun violence that took place over those 5 to 7 days while we were gone. And, we can't stop that, but we could at least ensure for those 7 days, those boys aren't in that space.
Can you say more about that? Because I mean, Chicago certainly has a reputation as stereotype, but I'm curious, like, yeah, how prevalent the gang violence is and how the kids are talking about it. Sounds like you really kind of have your finger on the pulse of what's going on, for real, right? Not just the news and the media.
Yeah, I'd say part of it is ridiculously overhyped and played up. And part of it is very real. And part of it gets coded as an issue of being young men, Black men, Latino men, gang violence that is, blamed on migrants that are coming from Spanish-speaking countries or Black and brown countries. But what I'll say, having family in Europe and spending a lot of time in Poland visiting my family there, and having taken these young men across the country, there is a reality of gun violence that I'm always worried about. And it is not a Chicago thing, and it is not a Black and brown thing. It is a gun culture in the US thing, where when we go to really wealthy colleges, private universities, those schools may be on the news for a school shooting. When we go stay at a hotel somewhere in the South, we might go to an open all-you-can-eat buffet and then some video game place, go to a park, do all sorts of cool stuff, and then find out, oh, like 20 of the people staying at the hotel with us are adults from some organization, and they're all carrying guns right now because it's an open carry law, and it's perfectly fine and encouraged. And now I'm more worried about somebody's safety for this next 48 hours than I would be back in Chicago because I've crossed state lines. So the gun culture is, I emphasize, as a U.S. issue at large. There are no times when I feel like I could truly let my guard down. And it is sad that we started off the school year 3 years ago with a shooting directly in front of our campus. Students not only were hit by bullets, but so many students witnessed it. The trauma was not just the students who ended up in the hospital, who thank God recovered, but it was the students who saw it happen and the students who were not on scene, but knew coming back the next day that, you could see the holes in the glass. You could talk to the students and someone who knows someone who was hit, or you're directly connected to someone that was tied up. And that is a unique situation from my high school experience. Even though, as we're out talking about generations and things that change and things that don't, in the early 2000s, there was a monument somewhere in our school field that was to some students who had been killed by like a student with a shotgun in one of the first known school shooting attacks in the US sometime in like the 60s or 70s. It wasn't the same thing. It wasn't, it was long before Columbine, but it goes back to this thing, like Chicago gets a rep for something that is a much bigger issue than the Black and brown youth I'm working with in our school. And yes, access to guns is real. I've even spoken to colleagues who work at the school who have grown up in the same neighborhood or adjacent neighborhoods, who say, like, I remember gang violence, and statistically Chicago crime is at, I don't know if it's at an all-time low, but in the last 20-30 years it's much better today than it was in the 90s. And still, I've talked to colleagues who say it seems like everybody just has a gun today that was not the same 10 years ago, 15 years ago. gun violence is going down, and that's a good thing. And access to guns seems to be pretty easy. And so when easy to get, and when you ask me like, how are they talking about it? It's oftentimes, I think, to numb or to put up a wall and not think about how serious it is. If there are students who really can't take the bus or walk to school back and forth because they're afraid that someone's looking for them, it might turn into this like posterior, right, tough posterior of acting, I don't care, or it's just this, or, using cute nicknames and whatever jargon for these things that for like a 16-year-old developing brain are just hard to grasp for me as an adult.
That does open up a window into the lives of these kids. I want to pivot a little bit and talk about rites of passage and male initiation. And maybe there's a connection there because, again, I'm naive to this, but I imagine gangs have their own initiation. So I guess, for our listeners, you could let them know what a rites of passage is, and what a healthy version of that might be for a young teenage boy.
Sure. So rites of passage as an idea is the concept of moving from a youth into adulthood, from adolescence into ideally some sort of healthy form of masculinity, femininity, taking on the societal roles in whatever culture that are expected. And stereotypically, when I think of olden days, tribal days in some forest or some village, I think of men coming in the middle of the night, uncles, grandfathers, neighbors, and grabbing, 12-year-old boys and separating them from the mothers, from the younger siblings, and taking them out into the woods and saying, all right, here's a knife, and, come back in 3 days with the dead bear or tiger, or don't come back at all, and that's kind of the image that some of the students will kind of bring up when I ask them, what is a rites of passage? We watch a clip from the movie 300 where the boy's asked to go, fight the wolf.
Cougar.
Yeah. And at the same time, we talk about, what does that mean today, right? In 2025, what is a rite of passage, and what kind do we see? So we'll typically bring up quinceañeras and sweet 16s for young ladies moving into womanhood. We'll talk about bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs for the Jewish culture at 13. And I asked the guys about unhealthy versions of initiations. And most oftentimes, that word for them is, gang initiated, being initiated into the gang, blood in, blood out. So catch a beat down, get beat in, now, you're initiated into the gang. We talk about hazing. I explain oftentimes they may not quite know what to expect in college, or, the culture of sports, how it might look different. So we talk about what are fraternities and sororities, and how does hazing look, or binge drinking, or some sort of unhealthy initiation from a locker room sports culture that might already be prevalent in high school. So we talk about these different ways of how people find their kin, how they find their kind of community. And what we usually come back to is, if I'm not a young woman who's celebrating a sweet 16, if I'm not a woman who from maybe Mexican community has a quinceañera, then I don't really have a rite of passage. Maybe, we talk about life markers, walking across the stage, getting your diploma, getting a degree, getting married, getting your first job, getting your first home on your own. But the idea of leaving childhood behind and moving into adulthood is something that is just taken for granted, or it's just, you got this piece of paper and now you're employed at this company, and your 9 to 5 is, and your title is, and your mortgage is, and now you're an adult. So we could definitely link those ideas, because the heart of the program is, how am I staying in accountability with other people? What does integrity mean for me? And how does that change as I go from my boyish ways into my manhood? And so when these topics come up of gang violence, choices to be involved with drug use or drug trafficking or dropping out of high school or going to college or pursuing a career, it's always in the context of like, what is the healthy choice? What is the unhealthy choice? And ideally, the rite of passage is just being in the program, coming out on the other side and saying like, yeah, I just have these tools to stop, breathe, think, look inside, internalize, reflect, and how that impacts everything that happens on a bigger scale in that person's life.
I'm curious, does BAM host a rite of passage for their members, or do you outsource to other organizations for that?
So two different aspects to the program. If we're looking at the employees, we have the Becoming a Man counselors and the Working on Womanhood counselors have in-house trainings that resemble a modern day rite of passage program to some extent. When we look at our youth across the board, we do not have a standard rite of passage program. We don't have one particular ceremony or one particular weekend when everyone goes somewhere. The rites of passage piece comes in the framing of the curriculum, how it's presented to the students. And within that, we are in so many different cities, school districts, and individual schools working with so many different talented counselors that we absolutely have men who will work with their colleagues to take 2 or 3 schools worth of students and take a dozen kids and bring them to the woods, do some camping for a couple of days, and have an opportunity to, simulate something like a rite of passage program around a campfire. Within our partnerships, we partner with 4-Star Camp, which is an organization that takes a bunch of different nonprofits from Chicago and gives access for the youth to be in different summer camps for a week in August. And when we're up there, kind of through osmosis, they're getting so much of this like just values and lessons. And then when there's something powerful about having, 10 or 80 people sitting around a campfire and sharing what's going on. So in those regards, they have an opportunity to live through these rites of passage moments. But we do not have one standard event that takes all the students for 48 hours to a thing.
So I'm curious, I want to ask you, like, what do you think of rites of passage for adults? Because I'm kind of mixed on this. So maybe similar to you, I did the Warrior Weekend like in my late 20s, and I loved it. I think it in many ways started and reinforced the work I'm doing, but I also wished that I had done it when I was like 14, when like my brain was like a little mushier, more pliable, where I could be more present in some ways, not as kind of like metacognating or thinking about how are they going to do this or what's it going to be like, it's being kind of like pushed into something like that. So I'm curious, what you think about a rites of passage for an adult, and is it effective, or is there a way it has to change for someone that, call it 20s, 30s, maybe even 40s or 50s?
Well, I don't think it's like a mutually exclusive thing. I think if someone is post-World War II generation and does their rites of passage, I'll say Warrior Weekend because MKP is what I'm involved with here in Chicago, and I volunteer with the organization heavy. If I'm on a New Warrior training adventure and there's a man in his 70s, I see him touch something that maybe he hasn't been in touch with before. I imagine that's going to change how he is as a grandfather or as a husband or as a neighbor, even if it means his children are grown adults and the parenting phase is entirely over, or if he's retired and the career phase is over, But if he's involved with some sort of church or neighborhood or, you know, playing pickleball with some people down the street, if he got something from that weekend that lets him touch his mission, how he wants to interact with people, an ability to own projections and speak from the first person instead of the third person, I think that's a beautiful thing. And yeah, I oftentimes hear people say, I wish I had done this sooner. If they're 30, they wish they did it in their 20s. If they're 20, they wish they did it in their teens. The first thing you said about the Becoming a Man program is what the feedback I not only get from most people most often, it's also the same feedback, you know, I share, which is, oh, I wish I had this when I grew up. I wish my high school had this. So I think expanding access to rites of passage is important across the board. I think for sure I want to see it grow and be in more schools, so that youth are accessing it at those pivotal moments when, like you say, the brain is more pliable and your future is fully in front of you. And I think having programs for adults means you now have more men and women in the world who are, in the phrase of, you know, what I hear at MKP, doing their work. And if you have more men and women doing the work in their own lives, then as parents, as teachers, as whatever they may be, they're creating that environment for the younger generation they interact with to be doing their work. We just finished a homecoming ceremony last night for men in Chicago who completed their Warrior Weekend 2 weeks ago. And thanks to Zoom, we have a young man in his 20s in the room, and we have two squares on the television from two different men zooming in across the country. One is his father, who's middle-aged, and one is his grandfather, who's in his 90s. And the three of them are all talking about what links them is this rites of passage work, even though one was in his 20s when he did it a week ago, one was in his probably 40s, and one may have been in his 70s when he did it. But who's to say that there's a right or wrong time? I'd much rather have all three have an opportunity to have that experience and then bond over it than not. And certainly rites of passage youth focused is different than the rite of passage a man or a woman goes through as they enter into elderhood. And it's important for the young generation to have many generations surrounding them, to be with their peers, to have people just a little older. I see the way my guys react to the 18 to 21-year-olds that are counselor in trainings at the summer camp. They are like, you know, he says jump, and I just do it. I don't even ask how high I'm jumping now because, you know, it's like a big bro. It's you know, a role model. It's someone he wants to be. He's going to react differently than he reacts to a man in his late 30s or early 40s telling him do this or try that. So I think having generations that are closer in age, generations that are further in age, and then generations that are our elders who have a lifetime of experience that I or you don't yet have is also key to the community piece and to the rite of passage piece. With that said, I have spent time in New Zealand. Rites of Passage Foundation is an organization that does programs for young men and young women. And I see these 12, 15, 16-year-old young men that, you know, that I spend a week in the woods with, or what I imagine is happening when the young women are in the same space at a different time, doing a week with their mothers, their aunts, their bigger sisters. And I see that while the biggest focus is for the youth and getting a chance to ask questions they might not otherwise ask about things that might be taboo, about things that might be uncomfortable or awkward for a teenager to ask about sex or money or careers or whatever, it's also an opportunity for that parent, father figure, whoever. In that case, those rites of passage weekends are the young man is there with a family member. And so that father or that uncle has their own rite of passage, I think, coming out on the other side just by being able to be there for a week, be present as a mentor. So I think it's, you know, there's no right way, there's no wrong way. It's a lifelong thing. Going back, even the program that I work for is becoming a man. It's, like I say, a lifelong thing.
Yeah, I love how multi-generational it is. And it makes me think like you and many other guys out there are like recreating this culture. I feel like America or the West in general has lost a lot of that. And it's bringing this back together where you are able to talk with your uncles and your father and your grandfather and have this community of men around you. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. I'm curious as we wrap up the show here, if somebody's listening to this podcast and they're inspired and they want to look up a rite of passage or they want to get involved in our youth program like BAM, where can they start? What action can they take right away to get started on this path?
Today, I'd say go to ChatGPT and say, what are the best rites of passage programs in my area? And I have a feeling Sacred Sons, Mankind Project, Woman Within, these things will pop up. And I would say to reach out, send some emails, and see what the opportunities are.
Well, Paul, I really enjoyed having you on the show. If people want to learn more about you and your organization, where can they find you online?
ropgathering.com is our website that is promoting an event we hope will happen in the near future, organizing different men, women from across the globe that are doing rights work to sit in space and network together. ropgathering.com.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate having you on the show. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed what we're doing here, check us out. We are part of Men's Therapy Online. All of our stuff is located at menstherapy.online. We're at Men's Therapy Online everywhere, all social media networks, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all of it, Facebook. Check us out. And if you enjoyed the show, thank you so much for tuning in. And we'll see you next week on the episode of the Men's Therapy Podcast.